Hello and welcome to the Astrological Commission Podcast. This is your host, Issachar Bey, and I have with us somebody who I deem to be a very, very great astrologer, somebody who I respect immensely, somebody who I've known for many, many years to be such of a great astrologer. Now, when I say great astrologer, I mean not just because of how long they studied, but when you guys meet and get introduced to the person I'm talking about, you really get to see. I love the way that he approaches astrology, the way that we're able to see astrology through his lens, how he displays and teaches and begins to lay out his approach to astrology. And I think that you guys will love this interview today. And it's none other than the great, and I don't just mean that, I mean the great John Marchesella. How you doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you very much. That was very sweet.
John, could you tell me, how did you first get introduced into astrology?
Oh, I had just started college, and my roommate's mother was an astrologer. And she wanted to know who her kid was rooming with. So she had done my chart without me even knowing it before I even met her, actually. And then when we did finally meet, she said to me, "You're a young man, you need to stay in school and get your degree. But if you ever get interested in astrology, here's a book that you can start with." And she handed me Astrology by Ronald Davison, and I thanked her very much, and I thought it was a little curious, but the point is, she knew from my chart before even meeting me that I was bound to be an astrologer, and the rest, of course, was history. And I did read that book, obviously, and it changed my life.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So after you read the book, and you started to begin to study astrology, who were some of the teachers that you worked with, or what were the other books that you started to read right after that to kind of get you going and getting you in the direction that you were going in?
The next book I read was Saturn, a new look at an old devil by Liz Green. That was my second book in astrology. It had just come out. It was revolutionary in thought. Everyone was so excited about it. It was like if you can call it a bestseller in the astrology world. And it just introduced me to a whole new way of thinking. I was brand new to astrology, so I can't say that it introduced me to a new way of thinking about astrology, because it was my only way of thinking about astrology. But it changed my way of thinking about life. It also introduced me to Jungian psychology, which I later went on to study. So that was the next book I read. And the book after that was Astrology and the Four Elements by Stephen Arroyo. So we're talking now about 1976, 77, 78. Those were the years that I was really getting started. And I studied with Joanna Shannon and Lenore Cantor and Betty Lundstedt. Those were my three main teachers. And then, of course, along the way, you take a class with this person and you read a book by someone else and you go to a lecture with someone else. So there are so many teachers that we collect along the way, but those are the three main ones that got me started.
Wow. And so at this point, you're studying, like you said, you study with them, you're reading books, you're taking lectures. At what time or what place did you say to yourself, maybe I want to move into professionalism, or what was the actual time when you said, I'm going to be a professional astrologer, or I'm really taking this serious as something that I really see this is really life-changing here?
I never really decided that. that was kind of decided for me. It just kind of happened. And, I was very young. And I was very young and I was very stupid, thank goodness, because if I wasn't, I might have been too afraid to start. But I did something that I definitely do not recommend people do. After 6 months of studying astrology, I gave my first reading for someone who I don't know. I had, of course, looked at the charts of friends and family as soon as I got started. That's one of the first things that you do in class when you're beginning. But doing a chart for a stranger face-to-face, I charged her $10 at the time, and I just plunged into it, not knowing what I was getting myself into. And it worked. It felt natural. It felt right. And then I went on to my second reading, and then my third reading, and on, and it just kind of happened. It wasn't until many, many years later when I had an opportunity to do something other than astrology. I was offered a job doing something completely different, and that's when I said, oh no, I'm an astrologer. And that was one of the very few decision moments that I had about pursuing astrology, when I could have gotten out of it and I chose not to. And it was right after that, now we're talking about 1982, and I did my taxes, and my accountant said to me, so how'd you make your money this year? And I said, it was all astrology. And she said, well, then I guess you're an astrologer. And I hadn't thought about it before, but I thought, yeah, I guess that's what I am, and I'm an astrologer. So that was in early 1982 when I did my taxes for 81. The world was very different then. Things like that happened. I'm not sure they happen the same way now. I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time, because many people refer to the 70s as the golden age of astrology, because in the 70s we had Liz Green, Stephen Arroyo, Rob Hand, Betty Lundstedt. We had people bringing together psychology and astrology, and books were being published like good books were being published like hotcakes. Conferences started in local areas. It was a very booming time for astrology, specifically psychological astrology. So I was really in the right time at the right place. I was very, very lucky.
Wow. It's just amazing to hear this story. And then, so at this point, like you said, all this is going on, Liz Green, Stephen Arroyo, Rob Hand, you were studying, you're going to lectures, you're learning. At this time, what kind of astrologer did you consider yourself to be? Are you vocational? Are you psychological? Or were you just eclectic at that time, or did you move into a certain specific area?
Well, back then I was calling myself a psychological astrologer, because that's basically how I was learning astrology, was through the lens of psychology. And I also started studying psychology to help me with my astrology studies. So back then, that's what I would call myself. Now I just call myself an astrologer, and I'm very comfortable with that title, and I prefer it because it's, I think, a lot simpler than anything that I would call myself otherwise: a vocational astrologer, a counseling astrologer, a consulting astrologer, a professional astrologer. whatever the different titles might be. I just prefer to be called an astrologer now.
Yeah. And so how did you connect with NCGR?
Oh, I actually got into NCGR before I got into the study of astrology, actually, because I would go up to my roommate's mother's house because she would have meetings, NCGR meetings, where they needed volunteers. So I just lent my time to NCGR, and we would do mailings. Especially, we used to have what we called lick and stick parties in the day when we had paper mailings, and everything had to be done by hand back then, stamping and labeling. And so I would go volunteer, and I was just picking up astrology by talking to astrologers. And that's how I got into NCGR. And then, a couple of months after that, I actually joined as a member, because then I was more formally studying with Joanna and Lenore and Betty.
And then at some point, you actually you became the president, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I actually had maybe 3 rounds as president. It was early in my life. I had a lot of free time, so I could afford to be on the board. And then eventually, I think it was 1988, that I became president of the New York chapter for 2 terms. And then after that, I stayed on the board in almost every position that there was. Whatever needed to be done, I did. And then I went on to become president of the national organization. That was early in the 2000s. And then after my term there, I became president of the New York chapter again. And I'm in my 3rd term now as president of NCGR New York.
All right. So tell me, when you first became president in your first 2 years as tenure president for the New York chapter, tell me how that was, and just tell us a little bit about NCGR and the New York chapter. And then I want you to also dive into a little bit and tell us about your tenure as president of the national of NCGR, and just tell us a little bit about it and what were your roles? How did you feel being in a position? What did you love about it? Just give it to us from your perspective as being the president over that particular department, which I believe, I'm being biased. I'm from New York, born and raised, so I'm a little biased about New York. And then after that, we'll get into how I connected to you and how I first met you. But when I met you, you were also president at the time.
I'm sure. My time as president back in the 80s was very exciting because in my first year as president of the New York chapter, if people remember back to the brouhaha about Nancy Reagan actually having a White House astrologer, that story broke into the news right after I had become president the first time. So there was lots of curiosity about astrology from the public, from the media, and any astrologer who was worth his salt had a great couple of years in business, because if Nancy Reagan can have an astrologer, then anybody can have an astrologer. So that was a very exciting time, and it really boosted the chapter a great deal. It put us more into the limelight, into the news. So that was kind of fun and exciting. And that went on for a couple of years. And then I stepped down as president after my second term, but I stayed on the board in other roles. And when I became president of the national organization, the most exciting thing about that was putting together UAC. I had followed Madeline Hillis-Deneen. She spearheaded UAC 2012 with the other two organizations, Issachar and AFAN. And then her term was up, and I took over the UAC responsibilities. That was the one that we had in New Orleans in 2012, and it was a very exciting and very growth-oriented time in astrology. And then when my term was done there, then I went back to the New York chapter and followed Michael Luton as president. And I've been president ever since. And now it's been interesting being president before the pandemic and then after the pandemic, trying to build up our membership again, trying to offer more services, having hybrid conferences and classes, still getting our newsletters out. During the pandemic itself, we went all on Zoom and gave more events on Zoom, so we were very fortunate about that. We've had some great speakers. And now we're trying to have more hybrid events. People do appreciate being in person, but because of the pandemic, thanks to the pandemic, our membership grew around the country. So now we still have to cater to those members as well, and have online services for them. So now we're trying to negotiate all of that. And I just recently found out that the next UAC is going to be held in 2026.
In Chicago.
In Chicago, that's right, in Chicago. And I'm very happy to be a speaker at UAC 26.
And what do you think were some of your aha moments within the regional New York as you were the president, as opposed to the national? I'm pretty sure at the national level you had more of a responsibility. You know, you're overlooking so many other, the local chapters. But what would you say was the major difference? Or was there a difference in just being over New York as opposed to being over the whole national board?
Well, the challenge and the reward in both positions was unifying astrologers. And, unifying astrologers is like herding cats. We're a highly individualistic group of people. Obviously, Uranus rules astrology. So, of course, we're individualistic. When I was president of New York in the past and even now, I'm always trying to bring astrologers from different schools together. So we try to offer events on Uranian astrology, counseling astrology, mundane astrology, psychological astrology. We try to appeal to everybody, to unite everyone's thinking. When I was president of National, the unity had to come across the country and a couple of international chapters that we had. So then unifying the New York chapter with Florida chapters, with California chapters, with Texas chapters, all around the country, we had, I don't remember, I think we had 20 chapters domestically, and then we had 2 chapters in Mexico, in Thailand, in Japan, and then we wound up getting one in Taiwan while I was president. So just trying to keep all of those chapters organized and unified was a challenge, but also a great reward because it worked out very well.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Growing up in New York, for me was phenomenal at this time because I'm a young astrologer. I'm into it. I remember, God bless the late, great Michael Luton. We would go to his house for NCGR meetings. He had a great library. He probably had so many books, the great books that, he had one of the greatest libraries I've ever seen. And, I would go to those meetings. I would go to the NCGR conferences at FIT. I'm also Uranian, so I was very connected with Madeline Hillis-Deneen, Faith McInerney, just all of the Uranian, just in New York City. And I happened to go to a lecture of yours one day, and I had already had a lot of your lectures, knew who you were, and this lecture was phenomenal to me. So I'm at this lecture, and you were lecturing about a woman who you were, like I said, you explained the story. I don't know exactly, was it transiting Pluto or Uranus or progressed Pluto or Uranus on her fourth?
Transiting Pluto was going to the fourth house cusp.
Yeah. And you told her that she was going to move, and she kept saying, no, I'm not going to move. There's no way possible that I'm going to move. And ended up it was 9/11. And so I just thought that was so phenomenal to see how that played out and how you were able to call that and able to, and that's one of the great lectures I've always remembered. I still have it. And could you elaborate a little bit on that story? Because to me, that's how I always remembered you. I said, John is phenomenal, man. I tell people all the time, and so when we were able to schedule you for this, this was so phenomenal because I wanted to talk about this story because that's one of the lectures that I tell everybody, when I meet them, when we start talking about astrology, they start asking me, what are some of my aha moments about just NCGR, but there's a lot of them. But that right there, oh man, that was a phenomenal lecture. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. If I remember correctly, but obviously this was over 20 years ago, I think it was a lecture on Pluto. And the point that I was trying to make is that when Pluto says you're going to do something, you're going to do it, whether you like it or not, whether you expect it or not, whether you are anticipating it or not, it's going to happen. And it might happen in the beginning in a threatening way, an anxiety-provoking way. It might make us feel very vulnerable, maybe powerless. But ultimately, when Pluto transforms us, there is never going back to the way that it was before. And our lives are always better for it in a very end of an era, beginning of a new era kind of way. So the point that I was trying to make with the story that I was telling, I do remember the story and the client, and I was sure that she was going to move, and she had other indications. It's never any one thing. There's always a progression, an eclipse, a transit, all coming together to kind of conspire to make events happen. But my point of the story is, she wasn't expecting it. She was a little bothered that I was saying it, especially since I was pretty sure about it. And then it took and now this doesn't always happen this way for everybody. Obviously, we have our own experiences. But it took an event beyond her control, namely 9/11, and she was living down in the World Trade Center area. It took an event of that magnitude beyond her control to get her out of that apartment. What I didn't say in that lecture, because I didn't find out until a couple of years later, the move that she wound up making actually was very beneficial for her. And by hindsight, she realized that she was actually very stuck in her apartment downtown and very isolated. Back then, living down there was fairly isolating. So she wound up actually being very glad that she moved. I'd like to say glad that Pluto got her to move. So that was the end of the story.
Yeah, I just think it's phenomenal. I mean, if you were a real astrologer and you see stuff like that happening, I mean, that's just phenomenal. It just it just makes you feel good as an astrologer to see how the system works and how the planetary alignments work, and to see something like that, an event happen, and he was able to call it before it happened, and just look at the event that actually solidified what he had already told her. And you're absolutely right. When Pluto comes, I had a sort of a same situation, but I had transiting Pluto conjunct my natal moon, and my natal moon is the Lord of my 10th. I have Cancer on the 10th. And I kept asking everybody, like, what's going to happen when, Pluto hits my moon? My moon is in the 3rd house in Sag. It's the Lord of the 10th. And I kept asking everybody, and they were like, oh, you're going to have a transformational experience and all of this stuff. And as soon as Pluto hit my moon, I moved from New York. I left New York, and I moved to Las Vegas. So,
wow.
So you're right. When Pluto comes, it's going to definitely make you do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, from that, you continue to do lectures, and now you're doing lectures and you're also teaching as well, correct?
Yeah, I've always I started teaching astrology, I think, back in 1981. The first class that I ever gave was actually a workshop on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 1981-82, and I did a whole workshop on that. That was the first time that I taught, and I've been teaching ever since then. During the pandemic, I had to switch, obviously, from in-person classes to teaching on Zoom. And before I did it, I couldn't get my head around how I was going to do it, but I've just always been one to give things a shot. And I wanted to do something for people during the lockdown. It was in the very beginning of the lockdown. And I just wanted to do an active service. So I taught a class, an introductory class for novices, for the layperson. And I thought, well, I'll probably get about maybe 20 people, and it was free. And I thought, well, I'll get 20 people who are interested. Well, I got 100 people. I lost count after 100. And I just dove in, and I found out that I love teaching on Zoom. And now, all these years later, after the lockdown, I stayed on Zoom, and I've got students now in one particular class that I have. I've got a student in Vietnam, a student in Australia, one in Shanghai, one in London, in California, in Florida, and then in New York, all in the same class on Thursday night at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
So it's wonderful now to get all these different perspectives and questions and concerns from people from all over the world in the same class. And the students in that class have formed study groups with each other. And now they're sharing their experiences of astrology with each other, which I think is phenomenal.
Yes,
so now
it is. It's absolutely phenomenal. I think to be able to have people all over the world tuned in at one time, I think that's great. So like you said, what maybe would have been something that maybe hindered you because of the pandemic, it actually opened up other doors for you to become more available, more accessible, all over the world, more international. So, yeah, that works.
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity.
So, in your psychological astrology, which is great, because it in so many different layers. Those who do study psychological astrology and understand the significance of it, the importance of it, and the power of being able to see it through that lens. When one of the things I love about your those, and you will give us your social media plugs at the end. I follow you on Facebook, and I see that you just did something called "How to Take on the Year 2025." And what did you discuss with that? What were some of the things that you were able to divulge to the students?
Yeah. This is actually a lecture that I give at the end of every year for the coming year. And there are two parts to it. Mainly, I just share with students my preparation for the coming year with all of the important dates and phenomena that are happening. The dates of planetary stations, the dates of the eclipses, the periods of Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde, if there are that year. And also I add to it earlier versions of where the planets have been. So if Saturn is going to be passing, let's say, through the end of Pisces, early Aries, as it is in 2025, then I look back in the ephemeris and see when was the last time that happened, excuse me, which was back in the mid to late 90s. And I might even go back 30 years before that, in the mid to late 60s, and start making some comparisons for students between earlier versions of Saturn, and I do it for the outer planets as well. And it just organizes the information of the year to come to help prepare for preparing for readings easier and more streamlined so that you don't have to start from scratch with every reading. And then I also give some advice on how to handle whatever trends there might be. In this case, the trends of 2025. Pluto just recently changed signs to Aquarius. Neptune and Saturn will be changing signs from Pisces to Aries and then back again to Pisces. Uranus is moving from Taurus to Gemini back into Taurus. So these trends will be taking place actually through 25 and into 26. I don't have any specific predictions to make about them, except to say that people should, my advice to people is play it by ear, because the planets weaving and bobbing from this sign to that sign back to another sign, every time you think that one thing is going to happen, something else is going to happen instead. And just as you think that's going to be the new trend, then there's going to be something else that happens instead. So during these years when there's a great deal of transition, I think we just need to kind of play it by ear. And these periods are not uncommon. Students of astrology would remember back in like 2008, 2009, 2010, during the financial crisis, there was the transiting T-square of Saturn in Libra opposing Uranus in Aries, both a square to Pluto. All of those planets were changing signs at the same time. So, and obviously that was a very critical time when sometimes you just gotta go with the flow and see what happens. And that's what I think we're all in for in the next year or two as well.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. And I love you on your social media Facebook page, how you you cover the events that take place. One of the ones that jumped out to me right away was the Malcolm X. You did the chart of Malcolm X, and you also elaborated how his daughter just filed a lawsuit against New York City and the FBI concerning his assassination. I thought that was phenomenal as well.
Right. Yeah, I try to stay out of current events on my Facebook page. And I go more for news stories that are either a little bit obscure or things that involve the past. So the connection here is, Malcolm X has been dead for 50 years or whatever. So why out of nowhere would his name come back into the news because of the lawsuit that his daughters are filing? And the chart of Malcolm X still works. So I did something about the current transits and progressions to his chart to explain why he's in the news now, and also what was happening at the time of the assassination, and how there are correlations between all of these times, and the chart of a man who is dead, but his chart still works. I do that quite a bit, actually.
Yeah. In your practice, I like to ask all astrologers this: when you are doing a consultation, or even this in your studies, when it comes to forecasting, what techniques do you use, and which ones do you find to be very accurate in forecasting?
Oh, I keep things pretty simple. I work with secondary progressions, transits, and eclipses. And the way that I explain this to students is that progressions represent what we are ready for, what we're open to, what we will allow to have happen in our lives, whether it appears as a good event or a bad event. I try to stay away from the words good and bad. But let's say if our house is going to burn down, which obviously would not be a good event, but there has to be something in the secondary progressions that will allow that to happen and make us ready to survive an experience like that. The transits and the eclipses together represent what is going to happen, the actual event itself, and sometimes transits represent what is not going to happen. Half the time, people come to me for readings because they're planning on something to happen, or want something to happen, or expecting something to happen, but it's not happening. And the transits explain that. So I keep it simple with the techniques that I use. Even in the natal chart, I just work with the basic planets and signs plus Chiron. I don't go into anything else. And that's just me. We have a myriad of tools, fixed stars and asteroids and Uranian planets and midpoints that I think are all valid. We have different house systems that we can choose from. There's so many things that we can work with. And I think whatever people feel comfortable with, that's what they should use. And I am quite predictive in my work, but in fact, an expression that I often use in lectures about consulting or counseling is that prediction is astrology's unique contribution to the helping professions. And I do think that predictions can be very, very therapeutic for people. And sometimes predictions are very bold. When I told the client, you're going to move, that was a very specific prediction. Sometimes a prediction is just the description of time. This period makes for a major undertaking in your life, like starting a business or going back to school or making a relocation. To an astrologer, all of those things are very similar to each other. It's I'm predicting a new beginning, a fresh start, planting new seeds, but it's up to the client to choose which one of those things will be. And then some readings are not at all about prediction. Some readings are more about the understanding of the natal chart and why do I do what I do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Each reading is completely individual for each person.
And so if somebody wanted to study and say, hey, John, I want to study with you, how can they study with you and what can they expect from your program?
Well, my classes are always posted on the NCGR New York class listing, so you can see those on astrologynyc.org. And the winter semester will be posted in about another 2 weeks. It begins in January. And you could reach me directly through my email address, which is astrojohn8@icloud.com, and I'd be happy to let you know what I'll be teaching.
And if one desires to get a personal consultation with you, what can they expect?
Well, the way that I usually say it is the natal chart is the story of your life, and the predictive part of the reading lets us know where in the story you are these days. What is the time about? What season are you in? I work a lot with the images of the seasons. I believe that's really what astrology is based on, is the seasons, and that each sign takes its quality from what's happening in nature at that time of year. So I just try to describe who you are and where you are in your story these days. My readings are about an hour and a half. I usually book about 6 to 8 weeks in advance. I'm open to any questions that clients might have, and sometimes clients just like to listen to what I have to say.
Okay. And if somebody's listening now and they've been hearing us talk about NCGR, could you explain to them a little bit about what NCGR is, how could they join, and the benefits of being a member of NCGR as a whole, as opposed to your local chapters as well?
Well, we have some material benefits in that the national organization puts forth 2 journals a year. Those are actual paper journals. Then we also have e-newsletters, usually every other week, on more current events and things that are topical. We offer discounts on all conferences. There'll be a discount for UAC when we have national conferences. We're also associated with some British organizations, so we have mutual discounts on conferences in England with some of the British organizations. So those are some practical reasons to join. We also have webinars that are often free for members. But the real reason to join any organization, although I'm very biased to NCGR because that's where I've spent the bulk of my career, is community. It's where you connect with other astrologers. And astrology is like a foreign language. So you've got to get together with other astrologers and speak the language. That's what's so great, especially UAC, which is the international conference, and it attracts people from all over the world, from Europe, from Great Britain, the United States, of course, from Mexico, from South Africa, South America, from Asia, from India, from Australia. You have astrologers from all around the world, literally speaking different languages, but we all understand astrology, and we take over this huge hotel, and when we meet each other in the lobby or over meals or in the elevator. And we can say things to each other like, well, how are you doing? And you say, well, Pluto's squaring my moon. And the other person says, oh, that's too bad. Are you okay with it? Are you handling it? Yeah. So they know exactly what Pluto square my moon, what it means. It's our own language. So you have to get together with other people and speak it, whether you get together in person or online. And that's really what belonging to NCGR is really all about.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I did an interview earlier this year with Madeline Hillis-Deneen, and we were talking just off record. And she was like, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying. I'm hanging in there." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, Saturn is in Pisces, and all my planets are in Pisces. My Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all in Pisces, and Saturn is just going up and down, up and down." And she started laughing, but only she would know if we were if we were in the elevator. Nobody would know what that means.
But that's the great thing about astrology, and it unifies all of us.
And upcoming, what do you have upcoming? Any lectures? Are you doing any anything with NCGR that we may want to know about? Any talks or anything?
Our next event is on International Astrology Day, which is March 21st, and Eileen McCabe will be speaking on counseling astrology, actually. And Eileen is top; she's terrific. And then in June we have our spring conference, and we're having 3 astrologers yet to be announced, speaking on 3 different techniques. So we're looking forward to that. For myself, I'm just coming off of a series of lectures that I've done for different NCGR chapters in the past year. So in the coming months, I don't have any other lectures booked, but I do have my classes. I've got an advanced class on chart interpretation that begins in early January. And then I have another class on an introduction to secondary progressions, which is taking place on Saturday mornings, starting in the middle of January. And then I have aspects and basic interpretation starting later in January on Tuesday evenings. And those on the NCGR website. Again, it's astrologynyc.org, or you can feel free to contact me directly.
And I just wanted to say that if anybody wanted to become a professional astrologer and they wanted to be, go through the different level 1s, level 2s, level 3s certification, they want to be certified as a professional astrologer with NCGR, that is also available too as well on the site. Am I correct?
Yes. That's a very important thing that I forgot, that I overlooked. If you want to become a certified astrologer, we have 4 levels of certification, and Mayor Epstein teaches prep classes on those, and Mayor is tops. She's just a terrific astrologer, You can take those now online. That's a new part of the program, and you can find out about that on our website as well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. NCGR is a great organization. I probably was with NCGR first, and of course, all the other ones were great too. But I am like you. I am biased because NCGR was the first organization that I was connected to, and it's a great community. I believe that John has done a great job. I've been connected while he was president of the national, and then also I'm biased because I'm from New York. So this is definitely an honor to have you on to discuss your journey We just wanted to give you your flowers, John, and let you know that we appreciate your contribution to astrology. You've made a great contribution, and you're still thriving. You're still moving. You're still growing. You're still evolving. But you have definitely been one of those on the forefront to push the needle in astrology, to teach it, to become a lecturer. You are a student, then you begin to now teach. Now you're beginning to expand. And so we just wanted to give you your flowers and tell you thank you. We appreciate all that you have done, and we want to let you know that your hard work, your dedication was not in vain. You are definitely one of the greats, and you definitely need to be recognized as such.
Well, thank you very much. That's really great to hear, and I appreciate it very, very much. And I'm, like I said before, I'm a very, very lucky person. I'm very lucky to have found astrology so early in my life, and to be able to stick with it and share it with everybody for so many years. So I've been very, very fortunate.
Yeah. And John, have you written any books?
The book that I refer to a lot these days is the World Horoscope of the Book of World Horoscopes by Nicholas Campion.
Campion, yeah.
It's partly a reference book and partly informational about mundane astrology and the beginning of countries. And I'm very interested in that right now. So I've been taking a look at that. It's not a brand new book, but it's brand new to me.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you, John, for, like I said, your contribution, all that you've done. Those of you that are listening, definitely reach out to John, his Facebook page. You can get on his mailing list, lock in with him on NCGR, all of his lectures. We look forward to seeing him in UAC, also wherever, they have any NCGR things going on. And you would not believe me, you would not go wrong by being connected to NCGR and also being connected to John, one of the greats in our midst right now. We want to salute him and say thank you, and we appreciate you. And John, I always like to say this one thing: we love you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, thank you very much. I have a feeling that your sun in Pisces is on my Venus.
Oh, that's good. Well, we will find out.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.